Aisha had always believed that some love stories were never meant to be told. Some were just fleeting moments, stolen glances, words left unsaid. Hers was one of them. It had been 6 years since she last saw Karan. 6 years since she had watched him walk away at the airport, his dreams carrying him halfway across the world. 6 years since she had written a letter she never had the courage to send. Now, as she stood in the middle of her childhood bedroom, sorting through old books, she found it again, tucked between the pages of her favorite novel. The envelope was slightly yellowed, the ink a little faded, but the words inside were as raw as the day she wrote them. Karen, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. She closed her eyes. The truth. The truth that she had been in love with him since their very first fight, that she had memorized the way he ran a hand through his hair when he was frustrated, or how his entire face lit up when he talked about photography, that watching him leave had been the hardest thing she had ever done. But she had never sent the letter. She had convinced herself it was better that way. After all, Karan had been chasing his dreams. Who was she to hold him back? And now, 6 years later, holding that letter again, she wondered, did it even matter anymore? An unexpected return. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her mother calling from the living room. Aisha, look who's here! She tucked the letter back into the book and walked out, expecting to see an old family friend or a neighbor. She never expected to see him. Karan stood there, looking almost exactly the same, just a little older, a little different. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Hey, stranger, he finally said, his voice softer than she remembered. Aisha's heart pounded. Hey! Her mother beamed. Karan's parents just moved back. He's visiting for a while. Aisha nodded, her mind racing. He's back? After all these years? Do you still go to that coffee shop near the old bookstore? Karen asked casually. She hesitated. Sometimes. Great. How about tomorrow at 5? She should have said no. She should have made an excuse. But instead she found herself nodding. Okay. Coffee and unfinished conversations. The next evening, Aisha arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early, her heart pounding. She had spent hours debating whether to bring the letter. In the end, she had tucked it into her bag, unsure of whether she'd actually give it to him. Karan arrived right on time, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still take yours with no sugar? He asked, handing her one. She smiled. You remember? I never forgot. They talked for hours, falling into an easy rhythm as if no time had passed. They laughed about old college memories, shared stories about their lives since they last met. But there was one thing neither of them brought up. The past. The night he left. The words that were never said. It was only when the cafe was about to close that Karan leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Aisha, can I ask you something? Her breath caught. Of course. Back then, before I left, was there something you wanted to tell me? Her fingers tightened around her cup. She could lie. She could smile and shake her head, pretend the past didn't haunt her. Or she could tell him the truth. Slowly, she reached into her bag, pulling out the letter. I wrote this 6 years ago. I never sent it. Karan looked at the envelope, then at her. Can I read it? She nodded, heart racing as he unfolded the paper and began to read. She watched his expression shift, from surprise to something softer, something almost regretful. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite read. Aisha, she braced herself for rejection, for him to tell her that it was too late. But instead, he smiled. Do you know why I came back? She shook her head. Because after all these years, I realized something. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, crumpled piece of paper. I wrote this the night before I left, but I never sent it either. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Aisha, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up. Karen. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. We lost 6 years. Let's not lose any more. Aisha let out a soft, shaky laugh. I think I'd like that. And just like that, their love story, one that had been left unfinished, finally got the ending it deserved.